Anthony, what would you say your best advice would be for someone that has a stepdad and a dad that are polar opposite?
Well, I would tell the parents to get the child into therapy. Even if the kid is well balanced and happy and looks to be fine, get an appointment with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It can help because there's going to be a trauma. It's going to have an effect. And even though the kid may be masking it from you, it could come to the fore later in life. So very definitely give the child a shot at some therapy.
You're listening to the Nacho Kids podcast, where we discuss all things step-family related. Real stories, real people, real help. Your hosts are the creators of the Nacho Kids Method and the Nacho Kids Academy Step Family Coaching Team, Lori and David Sims.
Welcome to episode 262 of the Nacho Kids podcast.
What's up, y'all? Everything going good? Kids out of school for the summer. Nobody's driving anybody crazy.
Oh, yeah. Summer.
Summertime.
I remember those days.
Yep. The kids look forward to it, and the adults do not. And the step parents absolutely do not.
You remember I would pay your kids to watch Jackson. That way nothing would happen to him, and the others wouldn't do anything to him to hurt him.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. They made some bank off me. Yep.
Yep.
I think one of them, or maybe two of them, didn't do it. They're like, nah, I don't want that responsibility.
Yeah. They were smart.
Well, our guest today is Anthony J. Mohr. He served for 26 years as a judge on the Superior Court of California.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I bet he has some stories.
He does, but he's also a step kid.
Oh, okay.
And he wrote a book about being a step kid.
Huh.
And the book is called Every Other Weekend.
I figured it'd be called Don't Judge Me.
It's Every Other Weekend, Coming of Age with Two Different Dads.
Okay. That should be an interesting story.
It is. It's a really good book. I was surprised at how much I liked it, actually.
Yeah, you can pick that up on Amazon, as a matter of fact.
Yes, you can. And Barnes & Noble.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, David, we got a lot to do.
Well, then we ain't got time to be chatting. So let's get to listening.
Today, we have Anthony Mohr. Hey, Anthony, how are you?
Okay, Lori, I'm fine. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being a guest. So, you wrote a book called Every Other Weekend, Coming of Age with Two Different Dads.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your story, growing up as a kid, how you ended up with two dads, all that good stuff.
Well, growing up with two dads, I came by it the normal way, a divorce. I mean, it could have been a death. It wasn't. My parents divorced when I was 9. At the age of 11, both parents remarried. So I picked up a stepmother on one side and a stepfather on the other within a few months of each other. So there you go.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then, I sort of toggled between the two households all the way through grade school, high school. And even in college, I would run back and forth and see them. And, we got along. I mean, both fathers and families got along. We had our speed bumps. There's no question about that. But people started encouraging me to write a book because of the two fathers. They were very unique, very opposite, and well-known, both of them in their own fields. And so finally, somewhere around, the beginning of the pandemic, I said, all right, enough people have told me to do this. I'm going to sit myself down and try to write a book.
And a perfect time for it during the pandemic.
Yeah. I have written some essays before, which ended up as little standalones in literary journals. So I had probably 10 or so essays, on the subject, which I could convert into chapters. But then after that, I had to just write the rest of it.
And I tell you, I'm in the middle of writing my book, and it is not as easy as I thought it would be.
No, not at all.
No.
I don't care what kind of a book it is. It takes time and it takes a lot of thought.
Yes. Your parents get divorced, and then you get a stepmom and a stepdad when you're 11.
Right.
And I want to talk about your stepmom because you don't really talk about your stepmom.
I know I don't. Well, first of all, she's the person that caused the divorce. She
Oh.
was the script girl on a TV series my father was acting in called Foreign Intrigue. And we were all living in Sweden. That's where it was filmed. And Mai was Swedish. She had divorced from her first husband, had two very young children. And one was 6 years younger than I, and one was 4 years younger. And since I was 7, do the math, it was a baby and a toddler. But in any case, unknown to my mother and obviously unknown to me, they took up with each other. My father came home after the year in Europe. The next thing we know, Mai is out here in LA with him. Allegedly, they're working on another series called Rough Sketch. It never went anywhere. I remember watching the pilot in the bedroom. They set up a reel and watched it, and I was bored as all get out. That's not to say it was bad. It just means I was at the time 9 years old, and didn't appreciate it. It was about an artist, if I'm not mistaken, and Mai's first husband was an artist. So there you go. But in any case, the next thing we know, that I know, in September of 1956, I guess, at the age of 9, my parents tell me they're not going to live together anymore. I had no idea what that meant. The word divorce wasn't said, but the next thing I know, my father is not in the house anymore, and it was a trauma, and it was very hurtful. And I still didn't understand that it was because of Mai. I didn't understand that until 2 years later, when my mother said, "Your daddy got married." And I said, "Oh, who did he marry?" Answer, Mai. You could have knocked me over with a feather.
Yeah. And you're like, how did I not see this?
Oh, I didn't. I mean, I was, I'm a little kid, but I was,
Yeah.
I sensed underneath that there was tension in the marriage.
Right.
I wasn't aware of it, in a conscious way, but unconsciously I was, because I used to draw cartoons, and in the cartoons, the adults would yell at each other and fire would come out of their ears and noses and mouths. So I knew that, looking back, that there was something wrong.
Yes.
But my father married Mai, and the good news is my mother remarried a few months later, and there we were. 2 new families.
Yes. With your stepmom, did she parent you?
Not really. She did her best. I don't want to trash her. I didn't try to trash her in the book, but she was very, very concerned with money. And my father, he wasn't doing that well after the series in Europe. It was a wrong decision to go there. I write about this in the book. He never should have done it. He was offered the lead in Wyatt Earp, The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp. He turned it down, and the person who got it was Hugh O'Brien. But my father wanted to be the man of mystery and work in Europe, and so that's what he did. And he took over a dying series, and the series did not come back to life. It died after 1 year. So, and then he's away, and people kind of forgot who he was. And he never really quite regained his momentum. He had a lot of little guest feature roles on TV shows, mostly Westerns, and he did very good work. He was a superb actor, but he didn't regain the renown that he had earlier. And so money was tight, and he would be very frank and tell me that. Mai was much more blunt about it. She one time said, "Don't you realize that we're poor?" And the polar opposite, of course, was my mother's new husband was rich. He had a company. It was very successful. And he bought himself a lovely house in Beverly Hills where we moved. He built a 58-foot catamaran, at the time, the largest cat on the West Coast. My mother had anything she wanted, including a mink coat and God knows how much bespoke jewelry. So one weekend I'm sitting there in Beverly Hills, in the good life. And the next weekend we're in a little rented house in Hollywood, hearing Mai, complain about the lack of money.
Right. Now, your dad started off in radio, right?
Yeah. And that was his biggest success. Lori, that was where he really shined.
I loved reading that part because it just reminded me of how my grandparents used to listen to stories on the radio and all this stuff. So it just kind of brought back some memories for me as well.
I'm glad. Yeah, he played Philip Marlowe in, the Philip Marlowe series. He was on The Shadow. He was on Yours Truly, Johnny Dollar. He did about 500 radio plays, Lux Radio Theater. He was all over the place, and he was considered one of the very best actors on radio at the time.
And Isn't it ironic that one decision for him to go to Europe kind of just changed his whole trajectory?
It sure did. Can I add a little anecdote that happened to me many years into the future?
Yes.
I became a judge. I was on the LA Superior Court. And, I was always interested in travel and Europe and all that. And one day, another judge came into my chambers and he said, if you want, you and I could become judges at the Hague International Court of Justice. They've got a possible trial in Yugoslavia, and we could be judges on it. Would you be interested in doing that? And I said, well, how long would this take? He said, well, probably about a year. And I thought, okay, what happens after the year over in The Hague in the Netherlands?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of, well, we'll come back here and be a judge. I said, well, you're going to have to leave the bench and hope the governor reappoints you. Do you really
Yes.
think that'll happen? And if it doesn't happen, what are we going to do? The last thing I want to do is practice law again. And I turned it down. I said, no, I'm very happy here. I'm very secure. I love being a judge here in the States, here in LA. And while this would be a very exotic, interesting, kind of maybe romantic fling, the long run is not good and anything but guaranteed. So I
Right.
turned it down.
That was probably a really good decision.
Well, I kept thinking of my father and his decision to go to Europe and how in the long run it was a mistake.
Yeah. So did the judge that came to you, did he go?
No, he did not. I don't know whether he applied or not, but he didn't go.
Yeah, I just wonder what happened to him because I was waiting for you to say, yeah, he went and he came back and he didn't get reappointed as a judge. And so now he's selling crackers on the side of the road.
No, that would be if it were fiction, that's how I'd end it. But
Yeah.
no, he stayed on the court for a while. He was much more senior than I. He retired probably 3 or 4 years later. But my understanding is he did not get asked to be a judge over at The Hague.
So your stepmom, like you said, one weekend you're in Beverly Hills, the next weekend you're in a rented apartment. And she, like you said, was about money.
Very much. Very much. She was a nice lady. We most of the time we got along. Most of the time. But my father and that was her name, my Dietrich, the full name, they really had a difficult marriage. They fought a lot, and many of the fights occurred in my presence. Kind of loud fights. Now, that never happened with my father and my mother. Any disagreements they had occurred out of my presence. But my father and fought in the open, and I heard it a lot. And at one point, my father moved out and got a little apartment, and he said to me, "That's it, Charlie," quote unquote. I'm out of there.
Mm-hmm.
He got back together, I think, because of money, because divorce is not cheap. But he did meet another woman, Miriam, and I write a lot about her in the book. And I got dragged into the affair because, when he said, I'm going to go spend the day with my son, I was a convenient excuse. And then, Miriam would show up.
Uh-huh.
And I think their little love nest was the apartment where my grandmother lived. She'd go off and play canasta with her girlfriends, and Dad and Miriam had the place to themselves for the afternoon.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. And it got difficult. I wrote a couple of chapters about it, not to spoil the fun, but it was difficult. I mean, I did not enjoy it.
Well, of course not. I had a friend that many years ago, she decided that she was seeing somebody else. She's married, and which that's her business. That's her thing.
Right.
I don't agree with it, but again, that's not me, that's her.
Mm-hmm.
And she called me one day and she said, if anybody asks, I spent the night with you last night.
Yeah.
And I said, we need to have a talk.
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
I'm not going to lie, so don't use me.
I had a lawyer friend who didn't tell me he was using me as an excuse. And I knew his wife. And one Friday evening, I'm getting ready to go out somewhere, and she calls me at home. And she goes, hi, is Richard there? I go, what do you mean? And she said, is there? I said, no, what are you doing? And I said, I'm getting ready to go out. And I could tell that she was suddenly, became very quiet, and I could almost sense the shock on the phone. She says, well, you're not working on a brief with him tonight? I said, what are you talking about? He never told me to lie. He just told her, And then she called me.
Yep.
So inadvertently, I spilled the beans.
Yep. He was hoping she wouldn't call.
Exactly. But with Miriam, I was, I guess, the excuse. I can tell you another anecdote, which is not in the book.
Okay.
Because the timing I didn't think would work, but the whole story about Miriam is in a particular essay that was printed in the Rappahannock Review, and I do give the anecdote there. Many years later, like 2014, I'm at the gym and I become friendly with this woman who's there, and it's more of a friendship. It's not a romance. It's a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having dinner one night, and she says, "Was your dad an actor?" I said, "Yes." She goes, "My aunt knew him." I said, "Who's your aunt?" "Miriam." Well, of course, I dropped my fork right then and there and whatever was on it. And so we started talking. Now, Miriam had died 3 months earlier than our dinner,
Mm-hmm.
which almost was a relief because I really didn't want to see her again. But Miriam's son was very much alive, and he called and he said, "Look, we have a few things that we'd like to give back to you. We never knew how to get them to anybody, but we have a few things that really should be yours." So my wife and I met him one evening, and he gave us back a bunch of scrapbooks plus a portrait of my father.
Oh.
And now, what had happened was my father ostensibly broke up with Miriam around 1963. The whole story of that is in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding was it was through in 63. The portrait was dated. The artist who drew it dated it in 1967.
Huh.
What does that tell you?
Yeah. Miriam was still around.
A little circumstantial evidence there. They went
Yes.
to ground. They never stopped seeing each other.
Yes. Did your dad ever divorce Ma?
No. They stayed together.
Do you think she ever knew that he was seeing Miriam?
Yes. No question about it. In fact, I was trying to get rid of her because she was calling me and threatening suicide if my father wouldn't marry her.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. And finally, one night, I figured I've got to get this woman out of my life. I taped the conversation at home and then played it in front of my father and mine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's in the book. So mine knew what was going on. I think she knew before I did that, because I think my father had told her about her. But my father had said, "Hey, it's over," when in fact it was not over.
Mm-hmm.
He was my dad. God love him. He was, he was the life of the party. He was a bon vivant, and he was a player extraordinaire.
Yes.
I mean, Miriam's not the only one. I can tell you that right now.
Well, I'm sure if you know about the ones you know about, there's more.
Oh, you got it. You got it. And I mean, a number of his leading ladies, I have a feeling, got very friendly with him too.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to them about that. A couple of them where I knew there had been a liaison. Unfortunately, by the time I started to write the book, a number of them were dead.
Yeah.
It was sad. I should have started the book 15 years earlier, but I was too busy being a judge and a lawyer.
Yeah. Just life got in the way.
Yep. Life got in the way.
So how did you feel going from Beverly Hills house to your dad's house? Did you feel bad for your dad for not having the financial status that your stepdad had?
Yes. I mean, it wasn't front and center, but yeah, I felt badly about it. I will also tell you that Beverly Hills can make a snob out of a person.
Mm-hmm.
And after a little while, I got used to it, and I began to feel, well, hey, I'm of Beverly Hills now. And, what is this coming to a little apartment with this woman who's crabbing about money all the time? But I felt badly for my dad, not really for the money. It was for the fact that he wasn't succeeding as an actor.
Right.
And I knew that. And he wasn't getting the parts he wanted. And I knew that really hurt him. That's what I felt sad about.
Yeah. Do you think that Mai was jealous of your mom?
Yes.
Because of the money?
Yes.
Yeah. But she didn't ever take it out on you?
Well, there were times she would yell at me or she would find fault with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, she would snap at me a number of times. Maybe that's the reason. I never sat down and thought about it, but that guess of yours, that question is as legitimate as any other possible reason.
Yeah. So she had younger kids than you.
Yeah, she did. And we're still in touch. We're still friendly.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's good. Was it blatant to you growing up that you weren't her kid? Was it obvious how she treated you differently, or did she treat all of y'all kind of the same?
I was treated a little differently from her two children, but my father made sure that that would be glossed over. For example, he was always asked to ride in the Hollywood Christmas Lane Parade or the Huntington Park Christmas Lane Parade. And Tommy and Timmy would ride along. And I think my sophomore year in high school, he mentioned it or something that they had written there, or Mike mentioned it, or Tommy and Timmy mentioned it. One of them did. And I had no idea that they were riding with him, and getting interviewed. And I asked my father, I said, look, I'd like to be in this too. Absolutely. Bang. The next 2 years, I was in the parade with them. He made absolutely sure of that. And the parades were delightful. I had all sorts of fun and met all the actors and actresses and people. It was an absolute kick. It was a quintessential Hollywood experience. So that would be one way that he brought me kind of equally into the group. And we did a lot of things on our own, not with them. Right. So that was another way. Now, I must tell you, Stan treated me like his own two children.
Stan being the stepdad.
Equal. Yeah, stepdad, completely equal. And my mother treated them as complete equals. There was no daylight between or among us.
Really?
Yeah, none. And Stan's two children and I are still very much in touch. We spend the holidays together. We do a lot together. Yeah.
I know that it's ideal if a step parent can treat their stepkids the same as their bio kids.
Right.
It just is fair. We use air quotes. It's fair.
Sure.
But I also know that as a step parent, these kids aren't yours. So sometimes that love blinder is not there. So you're more apt to see what the stepkids do wrong or point out things that they're not doing right quicker than you are your own kids because you don't have that biological love blinder.
I hear you. I don't think that was the case with Stan. May have been the case with mine, but I don't think it was with Stan. I mean, he really was an expert at blending a family. He worked hard at it. He certainly had his faults, lots of them. But in that area, he was very good at, uniting two families and keeping them going even after his death.
I wish Stan was still here so I could talk to Stan.
Well, it would be nice.
Yeah.
It would be nice. He would be about 106 years old right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did your dad ever mention any jealousy towards Stan?
Never. He never did. At one point, there's a chapter I wrote about, kind of a fight that Stan and I had, and it came to blows. And I told my father about it. And, he was talking about how Stan is such a disciplinarian. I don't think he was jealous at all. If anything, he might have been very happy that I was sharing with him, a problem that Stan had.
So Stan was more of the disciplinarian than your mom?
Yes. Yeah, my mom was more permissive. I mean, she had rules and she laid them down, but Stan was much more the disciplinarian. I want my kids to work. Children should not have as much fun. Yes, we may be living in Beverly Hills, but the kids are all snobs, that thing. And my kids are not going to be snobs. They're going to work and they're going to get to know what it's like to, learn a trade or work in a trade, something like that, which created a lot of tension.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point he said, I'm going to take, my kid, Tony out of school and have him work somewhere in the boat yard. He had a boat. And my mother said, absolutely not. He's going to go to the speech tournament. He's going to go to the dances. He's going to be part of the high school activities.
And he's going to grow up and be a judge.
Well, who knew that? That wasn't on the radar screen at the time.
I do remember in your book, you talking about how Stan, he was a good stepdad, but he wasn't a fun dad.
Right.
Like you said, he thought y'all needed to work and not a lot of time for play. But your dad was kind of opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. He acted like my quote unquote pal. And, we played around and did all sorts of things. One thing I mentioned in the book, at the time, Top 40 radio was coming in. And KFWB was the channel to listen to for the kids in LA. And their DJs were known as, quote, the swinging gentlemen. And they were like, grown up Peter Pans. And in many ways, my dad was like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also said in the book that your relationship with your dad, it seemed to grow over time. It wasn't like y'all had the best relationship in the beginning.
Right. He didn't do children. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Hey, I need a shirt that says that. I don't do children.
Exactly. But, as I got older, we got closer. And after the divorce, we really got close. I mean, he really made an effort to, quote, be my pal, end quote.
Right. But he didn't have a problem laying down the law with you either, right?
Oh, no. He would. I remember one time I did something, I was probably 10 or 11 or whatever. And he said, quote, I'm still your father and what I say goes, period, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask me what I did. I don't recall, but I do remember that quote.
Yeah. I still remember my mama, I'll knock your teeth down your throat. Or I brought you into this world and I'll take you out.
Yep.
So how do you think that having a stepdad and a dad that were so different, what would you say the benefits were?
Benefits, navigating between two cultures, getting at home or, becoming at home between two cultures. Most kids grow up, one household, whatever the rules are, those are the rules. That's what they're used to.
Right.
And if they start meeting up with new people, different ways of life, it's much later on. It might be on an exchange program overseas or in college, something like that. Well, with me, it started at the age of, 11. So I'm dealing with two very polar opposite household cultures. And if anything, I think it helped me be a judge. Because when you're a judge, you are watching very different attitudes, personalities, cultures that are clashing in your courtroom. And you want to be able to try to keep from making a decision or coming to a conclusion until it's all over. And then you decide who's right. What's the right result in this thing? And I think having, two blended families helped me a lot in that area. That would, to me, would be the greatest benefit, because it was almost like spending a year in Bolivia and the next year in Japan. You're dealing with two very different, attitudes and ways of life.
It exposed you to both sides.
Correct. The difficulties, the disadvantages, not one of my friends knew me completely. They either knew my father or they knew my stepfather. They didn't know both. One friend, and only one, to my knowledge, met both sets of parents. And he met my father very briefly.
Really?
Yeah. Because, I'm living at home with Mom and Stan, and my friends were coming over a lot. So they got to know my mother and Stan. They weren't coming over to my father's house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I went out on a date, they never met my father.
Yeah. So you spent most of your time with your mom and Stan?
Certainly during the week, and then every other weekend.
Yeah.
Now, at my father's place, there were some other kids around, and I was friends with them.
But they just never went to your mom's?
Yeah.
And how far away did your mom and your dad live after they split up?
Oh, the farthest away they lived was maybe 20 minutes.
Oh, that's not bad.
No. We were always in Beverly Hills. They moved a lot because they were renting houses. The first house was somewhere in the Hollywood area. The next one was up near Universal City, going into the hills. The next one was above Sunset Strip at the top of the hill there. Then they actually rented a house in Beverly Hills and then an apartment. So it was a slow glide path down.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they ended up in Beverly Hills so the kids could go to high school there, but they were in an apartment.
Right. Yeah.
They were close. I mean, at that point, they were 3 blocks away.
Yeah. And it's interesting, though, because I know my son's father, he lives, I guess about 35 minutes away.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's like my son has his friends here and he has his friends there.
Yeah.
And very rarely do they intermingle.
Yeah. The twain doesn't meet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the disadvantage.
Did your step siblings, or did they ever show jealousy for you having a rich stepdad?
No. I think Tommy and Timmy were really too young to understand or appreciate it.
Yeah.
And on the other side, of course, Skip and Leslie weren't jealous at all.
Yeah, because it was their dad.
Right, right. And, they weren't jealous of the fact that I had exposure to Hollywood. Even when I went to the parades and stuff, I don't remember really telling them all about it. I certainly didn't crow about it or brag about it.
Right.
And I don't think they cared. They had their own lives. Skip was very into boats. He loved racing yachts. He had a hot rod. He was a quintessential California teenager. And if we want to talk about show business, his girlfriend was Troy Donahue's sister.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they were in Photoplay magazine back in the day. So Skip's not going to be jealous at all. If anything, I'm going to be jealous of him. He's 5 years older, and he was, kind of another James Dean in many ways.
Yeah. Neither of your parents had any more kids, right?
Right.
So you're an only child.
That is correct. By the way, Stan in his businesses always had kind of a protege who was a kind of a younger, good-looking kid who would have been the age that a child of Stan and my mother would have been. There was a quick window where maybe they could have had a child, but they didn't do it. Mm-hmm. But there was always sort of the son they never had.
Right. Do you remember going from being an only child to, I've got step siblings?
Yes. In fact, I wanted a brother all along when I was a child. I didn't like being an only child. So I was excited at the prospect of having one. The sister, this way, that way. But the brother, that one, I wanted one.
Did y'all always get along well? Or should I say, did y'all always get along in a sibling type fashion? Because, siblings fight like crazy.
Both of the above. Skip and I got along pretty well. I mean, there were some bumps in the road, but we got along. My stepsister Leslie and I at the beginning had a lot of sibling rivalry, but we ended up becoming very close. By the time we were I was in high school, or out of the 8th grade into high school, we were close friends. And in fact, we'd have parties together, and she'd bring her girlfriends. I'd bring the guys I knew. And in fact, one couple met there, and they're still married.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about when you're older and your dad's close to death. How close did your dad and your stepdad, how long apart was that they died?
My father died young at 54, 1968. Stan died at 96 and a half in 2013.
That's right. I remember thinking there was a huge gap between the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I did speculate in the book, what would have happened if my father had lived to 96? You know, would he have rescued his career? His last movie was Funny Girl. He played the club owner. Mm-hmm. So while it wasn't the starring role, you know, it was an A movie with A-list people. And, you know, maybe that could have boosted him back into another level.
Right.
Who knows?
And how did your dad die?
Heart attack.
You have any heart problems prior to that, or is just a real shock?
None that we knew of. Of course, now looking back, the signs were all there. I mean, he smoked like a chimney. He ate nothing but eggs and burnt bacon and steak.
Yeah.
Didn't work out, although he was thin, much thinner than I am. So, you know, looking back on it, somebody would have said, yeah, there's a signal here. But at the time, nobody knew. Nobody thought about it, and it was a shock.
Yeah, that's very young.
It was. It was.
How do you think, and I know this is pure speculation, but how do you think your life would have been different if your parents would have stayed together?
Okay. One person wrote a review of my book, and she said, if it weren't for my father, I never would have written a memoir. If it weren't for Stan, I never would have become a judge. So it's hard to say. I mean, I don't think I would have ended up as an actor. I wasn't a very good one, and I knew that early on. I may still have become a lawyer. Probably wouldn't have had the financial advantages I had with Stan, although my father may have been very successful. You know, he may have been, you know, he may have become one of those who got, you know, $10 million a picture. Who knows? I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
I would have been in LA. Whether I would have gone east to college and law school, I don't know. I still might have. It's very hard to say. I probably would have gotten married a lot earlier.
Really?
Oh, yeah, because divorce turned me off to marriage. The last thing I wanted was to be married. It just kept me away. I didn't get married till I was 66.
I know. When I read that, I'm like, oh my gosh, you didn't get married till you were 66?
Yep, you got it. So my guess is the biggest difference might have been an earlier marriage.
Okay, so I'm sure you dated during this time before you got married.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm sure people were like, you're 40 years old and you've never been married. What's wrong with you?
Or 50 or
Yeah.
60. Oh, I got that all the time. I got that. I mean, people thought I was a misogynist. They thought I was gay. They thought I was, warped. I got
Yeah.
all of those things. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in fact, it was because you had went through divorce as a child.
Right. And, I mean, I really, quote unquote, I never met anybody I wanted to marry, or if I wanted to marry them, they didn't want to marry me.
Yeah. And it's got to be both ways, huh?
Exactly. Exactly. There were plenty of women out there who kind of took one look and said, this is not a good prospect. I'm out of here.
And it's probably just because you hadn't been married and you were 40 or 50 years old.
Right. Yeah. The longer you're single, the harder it is to find somebody who thinks you're a good prospect.
Right. Because they automatically think something is wrong.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what made you become a judge?
Good question, because I never really thought about it. In fact, my high school had a student court and I thought they were a farce. I think I have a chapter about that, or at least a passage about it. What made me become a judge? Well, everybody said you should be a lawyer. They said, look, you like to write. I was on the paper in school. You like to speak. I was on the debate squad, impromptu speaking, all of that. They said, that's the markings of a lawyer. And I didn't know what else to do, although I thought about being a journalist. But I ended up at law school because the applications were easier than the journalism school applications.
Really?
Yes, I started applying to both. And I did the law school apps first and then turned to the journalism school papers. But by the time I started to fill those out, law schools were starting to take me. So I said, okay, I'll go to law school. I'll write on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made me a lawyer. And after a while, I realized I didn't like it that much.
Yeah.
At least I didn't like being in a firm. So I went out on my own. That was fun for quite a while. But then I got tired of that. Now this is around 1991, 1990, 1992. And a couple of friends of mine approached me and said, have you ever thought about being a judge? And the answer was no. I don't know the governor. I don't think I would have the juice to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, we hate to tell you, we think you'd be good and we might be able to help you. One thing led to another. And there was one person with a very strong connection to Pete Wilson. And so I filled out the application. I had a feeling I would like it because lawyers in California can sit as judges pro tem, just handling small matters like traffic tickets or something for an afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it and I always enjoyed it. So I went ahead and put the papers in, went through the interview process. It's really helpful to know somebody who can push your application along. And
Yes.
that's what happened. And luckily, I got the appointment.
And the Superior Court is criminal stuff, right?
It's everything. It's everything. It's civil, it's family, it's criminal, it's juvenile, it's mental health, it's dependency, probate, you name it, we do it.
Okay.
It's all the trial level court. We used to have a municipal court, which handled misdemeanors and little civil matters under $5,000, soon to be under $25,000. I was appointed to the municipal court. I was there for 3 years. Then I applied for the Superior Court, and Christmas Eve of 1997, the governor elevated me.
Okay. And when you were an attorney, what was your area of practice?
Mostly business litigation, civil business litigation, some appellate work, and that was it. I didn't do family law at all. I wanted to stay far away from that for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. Once in a while, I would handle a criminal case. I was a volunteer prosecutor for a little bit, and I enjoyed it. I kept thinking maybe I should have been a prosecutor, not a civil lawyer.
Do you like to argue?
Oh, I guess.
Yeah.
Not in my personal life, but, as a lawyer, it was fun. Now, now I'm above the fray. It's nice to hear the lawyers arguing, but you sit there and you think, this is great. All I have to do is the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in our podcast, we often talk about the family court system.
Yeah.
And how messed up it is. And that comes from me being on a winning side every time I've ever been to court with my ex.
Yeah.
But it's hard for people to feel like they're being, number one, represented fairly in the brief amount of time that this attorney has to represent them. The cost, is crazy to retain an attorney to go to court in general. Right. And then it's, it can just depend on the judge's mood that day. And that is the scariest part, because you can be the best person and you can be the best person for this child, but then the judge has some kind of qualm with his ex, and he's like, nah, I'm not giving her full custody. So it's not always fair, number one.
Right.
And it's like, it's not black and white. I know a lot of the rules are black and white, but a lot of them, there's those gray areas that, you can just go either way. And it's like gambling, really.
That can happen. When I first became a judge, family law was really the dumping ground. Either the newest judges were sent there, or a lot of the judges who were kind of past their prime were sent into family law. So they didn't get the best.
Mm-hmm.
It's different now. People recognize that family law may be the most important thing the Superior Court does. And so we have people who are very committed to it and really want to do the right thing and don't want to just sort of make decisions based on how they fell out of bed in the morning.
Right. Yeah. My husband and I joke about how it needs to be like a panel of judges or even a jury trial instead of just this one person that has listened to your attorney for 10 minutes making a decision about your kid.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the interesting part. You're dealing sometimes with custody issues, and you have to make a fast decision, which is going to impact the child's life forever.
Right.
As opposed to civil, where you have a bunch of guys in Armani suits versus people in Brooks Brothers suits, and they're arguing over money, and you've got like 90 days to figure out how to rule.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little incongruous.
Well, I know a lot of people are starting the stuff to teach people how to represent themselves.
Yeah, but that's dangerous. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you about that.
Sure.
I know I never felt comfortable representing myself because I was afraid I would mess up something and lose my son.
Yeah.
So, if I had to sell everything I had and be in debt forever to get an attorney, that was what was going to happen. But my ex decided to file an appeal pro se. I think he was actually dating somebody that knew how to do this.
Yeah.
But then again, I didn't feel comfortable representing myself. So what do you see as the dangers of that?
Well, you're too connected with the case. You're too close to it.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know the law. You don't know the ins and outs. You don't know the rules of evidence. And even though we try to be fair to pro se, or what we call pro per, you use either phrase, or self-represented, that's another phrase. Even though we try to be fair to self-represented litigants, judges don't really care for them. We'd much rather have a lawyer who's seasoned and knows how to put on evidence and present a case. If you have a self-representing, oh God, okay, here we go, because so many of them don't know what they're doing, and they I'm not saying they make a mockery out of it. They just don't know what they're doing, and they mess it up completely. I have seen self-represented people do very well, and there were times I've ruled in favor of self-represented litigants against people with a lawyer.
Yes.
I have done that. But, the immediate first reaction is, oh gosh, here we go again.
Yeah. I've actually seen people represent themselves, and the judge, they're very kind to them in the beginning.
Yeah.
They give them a lot of leeway.
Well, you're supposed to. I mean, and the canons of judicial ethics in California require you to.
Oh, really?
To be courteous and allow them to be heard.
Okay.
And you can't advocate for them or coach for them, but you can help them out.
Right. Well, I've seen some judges that they're really good in the beginning, then they just get fed up.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
You ever see the movie My Cousin Vinny?
Yes.
I remember when the judge gave Vinny the book of Alabama laws, the statute book.
Uh-huh.
That was a good judge. I mean, Fred Gwynne played a very good, fair judge in that. And in many, many times in new judge orientations, people are told, watch the movie because Fred Gwynne is fair. And, it's like you take a pro per litigant, you say, look, here's the law. Here's the book that contains the law. I want you to go through it because it's going to tell you how to put your case on.
That's a good example. That's a really good example.
Yeah. Well, it's a great movie. And I forget, is it Marisa Tomei, who's the actress who plays the girlfriend? I think it is. But when she handles the expert witness, the questioning is perfect. She knows how to examine an expert witness. That's how you do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know I don't know that I could do it because, number one, I was a nervous wreck having an attorney.
Yeah.
Number two, I don't think that I could have not been emotional. And the judges don't want to hear the hate between the two. Like, oh, look what I saw on his Facebook. They don't have time for that. They don't want to hear that.
No, they don't.
And a good attorney will tell you, I don't want to see that mess. That's not going to help you in court.
Right.
And a bad attorney will say, yeah, let's pull up his Facebook and sit here for 3 hours and let me charge you $300 an hour to look at this crap,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. 300. Come on. That's for a paralegal.
Yeah. God, I tell you what, goodness gracious, it's crazy. And I know a lot of people can't afford it. And I remember one time my ex, he wanted to keep taking me back to court because he didn't want to pay child support. That's all it was. And he had told me, you're not going to make a dime off me. So he wanted to make sure I paid attorney's fees. Well, of course, every time the judge granted me at least a portion of my attorney's fees.
Sure.
But still, you look at this money and you're like, I could have sent my kid to Switzerland for 3 years.
Right.
Or something. And it's disheartening when you see stuff like that and the stress that goes with it. I actually had an attorney that shared an office building with my ex's attorney. Mm-hmm. And they would get into it in the hall, arguing about us. Mine would bill me, but his wouldn't bill him. I'm like, wait a minute. This isn't fair. Something's not right here.
Yeah, well, it's up to the lawyer.
Yeah, it is.
Whether you're going to bill the client or not.
Yeah.
Most lawyers I know, if they have a client they don't like, a client who's a pain, they're going to bill every second of their time.
Yes.
If they have a client who's a good person who, is reasonable, pays on time, they're going to definitely give them a break.
Yes. But now if you've got somebody that's messaging you or emailing you every 5 minutes expecting a 30-minute response, that's a bit much.
It is.
And I had to remind myself one time that the attorney that I was using, I wasn't his only client.
Yeah.
He was dealing with some major stuff in addition to my case. And when I say some major stuff, I'm talking about child abuse cases.
Yeah, that's serious.
Yeah. It's not just dad wants to reduce child support and things like that. But I will tell you, I probably had 5 different attorneys. One of them became a family court judge, so I couldn't use him, of course. And then several others, one of them, he was a nasty pervert guy. One of them, he obviously didn't keep track of what he was doing because he would tell me something, then call me 2 weeks later to tell me the same thing. And I'm like, man, we've already handled this.
Oh, man. Okay.
I had one attorney that I felt like fought for my son. One.
That's sad.
Yeah. And I recommend him all day long, every day. Because that's what you want. And it's not to represent me. It's what's in the best interest of my kid.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, Anthony, what would you say your best advice would be for someone that has a stepdad and a dad that are polar opposite?
Well, I would tell the parents to get the child into therapy. Even if the kid is well balanced and happy and looks to be fine, get an appointment with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It can help because there's going to be a trauma. It's going to have an effect. And even though the kid may be masking it from you, it could come to the fore later in life. So very definitely give the child a shot at some therapy.
I 100% agree. In fact, I think that every child of divorced parents should go to therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. Frankly, it should be a rule. I mean, if I were going to draft legislation, I would say that, if you're going to have a divorce, one of the requirements, if you have a child, who's a minor, is give the child at least 2, 3, 4 appointments with a mental health practitioner.
Right. Exactly. And that is the best advice we've ever heard. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. This has been a pleasure. It's been a great way to spend the hour.
Yeah, it's been great.
Okay.
And I appreciate you sharing your story and giving us some court information too.
Okay. Well, Lori, you take care. Best of luck to you. Thanks again.
Thank you. And what's your website? Tell everybody your website before we go.
www.anthonyjmohr.com.
All right. And that's MOHR.
Correct.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be well.
You too. Bye-bye. I think it's interesting how Anthony grew up in a rich family part of the time and a not so rich family the other part of the time. And I do think that he probably got to see the best of both worlds.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, because it's funny, I grew up and had, as you did too, I'm sure, you had those friends that were on one side of the tracks, as we say, and then friends that were on the other side of the tracks. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that they were fun in different ways. And sometimes it was like you had more fun with the people who didn't have all the stuff.
Right. All right. So we hope you enjoyed our interview with Anthony. And we really do hate to run, but we got to run. We've got tons and tons of stuff to get out.
That's right. And we have a group coaching call coming up in 50 minutes. Ooh. So we got to get it. Yeah. Well, matter of fact, it's probably a good time to say if you're interested in joining the Nacho Kids Academy and being part of these group coaching calls, as well as getting access to courses and challenges and all kind of other yummy stuff to help you, go check it out at nachokidsacademy.com.
That's right. And I do want to tell you that we are going to make some changes in the academy, and the group coaching call package will cost a lot more. So you can join the academy now and be grandfathered in to the Q&A calls at the lower rate.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good. Until then, I guess we will see everybody next week. Hope your blend is doing wonderful. And remember, life is good
when you nacho.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nacho Kids Podcast. Find us online at nachokids.com. Until next time, remember, life is good when you nacho.